The Eight Immortals Travel East Chapter 4.
Imagine looking down at your own lifeless body. Like your heartbeat is suspended, your breath is completely gone, and your consciousness is just floating untethered across the continent.
It sounds like science fiction, honestly.
Right. Now imagine the only thing keeping that physical shell from being incinerated or buried is a stressed out subordinate who has been given a strict 7-day deadline.
Oh, wow. That is a lot of pressure.
Yeah, if they crack under that pressure, if they miscalculate the time, or if they, simply decide they're tired of guarding a corpse, your anchor to the physical world is destroyed forever.
Just completely gone.
Exactly. It is the absolute extreme of vulnerability, like a total surrender of control over your own existence.
And it really strips away every illusion of safety we have, right? I mean, we spend our entire lives building these fortresses.
Oh, for sure. Financial security, social standing.
Yeah, physical walls to ensure our survival. So to willingly step out of that fortress, to just leave the biological hardware behind and entrust it to human fallibility is a terrifying premise.
It really is.
It requires a level of detachment that, honestly, most of us can barely comprehend, let alone actually practice.
Well, that terrifying premise is exactly the climax of what we are examining today. We are looking at a chapter 4 titled Tieguai Encounters His Master. And on the surface, it tracks the journey of a man named Mr. Lee, who will eventually become the famous immortal Tieguai Lee.
Right, a legendary figure.
But underneath the mythological narrative, this text is really a deeply psychological examination of human ambition. It's about the paradox of seeking isolation and the ultimate high-stakes mechanics of letting go.
And that narrative operates so perfectly as a mirror for us today. It forces you to confront the relentless human drive for accumulation.
Because we are literally wired for it, aren't we?
Biologically and sociologically, yes. We're wired to gather more influence, more resources, more knowledge.
Always hustling for the next thing.
Exactly. But this text introduces a philosophical framework that runs completely counter to that instinct. It asks what happens when the pinnacle of achievement isn't found in acquiring the world, but in systematically stripping it away.
Stripping it away until you are quite literally nothing but pure, unhoused consciousness. Which is just a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is.
So to set the scene, the text opens with Mr. Lee at this fascinating geographical and spiritual crossroads. He has just returned from Mount Hua, which is crucial context.
Yes, the geography is not accidental here.
Right, because Mount Hua isn't just a scenic hiking spot. It is one of the 5 great mountains of China. It's this towering, sheer granite massacus that represents immense external majesty and has this massive history of Taoist pilgrimage.
It's the grand stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Lee leaves that sweeping, grandiose landscape and retreats into a rocky cave in a deep forest. Like he goes from the top of the world to this enclosed, sensory-deprived environment.
And that environmental shift is a physical manifestation of his internal pivot. Mount Hua represents the grand external search for truth.
The big gestures.
Yeah, the pilgrimages we make. Moving into a dark, enclosed cave is the beginning of Niden, or internal alchemy.
Internal alchemy, right?
He is no longer looking outward at the majesty of the universe. He is attempting to map the macrocosm of the universe entirely within the microcosm of his own body.
Which sounds intense.
It is incredibly intense. The text notes he is studying the teachings of Laozi and Wang Qiu. And in classical Taoist terms, studying doesn't just mean reading a book.
It's not passive at all.
Not at all. It implies this rigorous, agonizing, ascetic discipline.
It's basically a complete rewiring of the nervous system. The text actually says his execution of the Tao becomes incredibly firm. He is putting in such extreme effort that he develops a highly specific ability.
The yin shen.
Yes, he can project his yin shen. Now, the text states this, as a matter of fact, like it's no big deal, but the mechanics behind the yin shen are incredibly complex, right? It's not a parlor trick.
Oh, far from it. It's a major milestone in internal alchemy. And understanding how it functions is key to understanding Lee's level of mastery here.
So how does it actually work?
Well, Taoist physiological theory views the body as a cauldron. Through specific breathwork, visualization, and basically the complete cessation of mundane desires, a practitioner takes Jing.
Wait, Jing is the biological stuff, right?
Exactly. It's their foundational life essence, usually associated with biological vitality. And they refine that Jing into Qi, or vital energy.
So there is a literal thermodynamic process happening internally. You are burning fuel to create a more refined substance.
That is the exact metaphor classical texts use: calcination and sublimation. Once the qi is sufficiently cultivated and purified, it is refined once more into shen, or spirit.
Okay, so Jing to Qi to Shen.
Right, and the yin shen is the first stage of this spiritual independence. Because it is yin in nature, it is associated with the unseen, the formless, the
Meaning it can leave the body.
Yes, it can leave the physical body and travel vast distances. It is completely invisible to ordinary people, and it can pass through solid objects because it lacks physical density.
But because it's a yin spirit, it still has limitations, right? Like, it isn't the final immortal yang spirit that has physical weight and can manipulate the material world. It's just pure observation.
Precisely. It's consciousness detached from the machinery. And to achieve that requires a flawless, unified mind.
Because if you're distracted, it doesn't work.
Exactly. If a practitioner's mind is scattered by anxiety or ego or mundane attachments, the Shen simply disperses.
Wow.
So the fact that Li can project his yin Shen proves that his internal environment is completely stabilized. He has achieved a terrifying level of silence.
Which brings us to this massive, kind of hilarious historical paradox in the text.
The disciple problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Li builds this perfect internal silence. He hides in a remote cave to do this solitary work. And what is the result? The text explicitly states that because of his profound spiritual power, pure and secluded people from all over the region hear about him.
They just flock to him.
They start flocking to his remote cave, begging to become his disciples. It's like someone deleting all their social media to go completely off the grid, and somehow that exact move makes them the most famous person on the internet. His attempt to disappear turns him into a spiritual epicenter.
It really highlights a fascinating sociological pattern, particularly within ascetic traditions. I mean, we see it with the Desert Fathers and early Christianity.
Oh, right.
Or the origins of the Shaolin Temple. The act of total renunciation creates this power vacuum that, ironically, attracts immense social capital.
That is so counterintuitive, but it makes total sense.
When an individual successfully unplugs from the societal game of status and wealth, they acquire a new, highly coveted form of status: authenticity.
It's the historical equivalent of the ascetic paradox. The very act of rejecting political or social power makes you the most trusted and therefore the most powerful person in the room. People who are dissatisfied with the artificiality of their own lives, these pure and secluded seekers the text mentions, they are naturally drawn to someone who has found an exit strategy. They hike out to the cave because they want the blueprint.
The issue, of course, is that the blueprint requires solitude, and their presence completely destroys that solitude.
Right.
The text notes that Li accepts these disciples. He transitions from the solitary practitioner to the master leading a community. He is suddenly responsible for transmission.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is.
Yeah.
He has to interpret his silent internal realizations into spoken language for these students, which inherently brings him back into the realm of the mundane.
I find this transition deeply problematic for his ultimate goal.
Yeah.
I mean, he went to the cave to achieve the next level of alchemy, to move beyond the yin shen, but now he's essentially running a spiritual academy.
Yeah, he's basically an administrator now.
Exactly. He has to deal with the interpersonal dynamics of a group of acolytes. He has to manage their expectations, correct their misunderstandings, and probably mediate their egos. Even if it's a cave, it's still a society.
Very true.
He has tethered himself to the very social dynamics he originally retreated from Mount Hua to escape.
And that tension is exactly why the universe has to intervene to break the cycle. Lin has plateaued. He is comfortable in his role as the master. If he stays in that cave teaching these disciples, he becomes a revered local sage, sure. But he never achieves ultimate transcendence. The Taoist path requires constant movement toward the origin, and Li has become static.
And the intervention the universe sends is incredibly cinematic. So Li is sitting in his study with these disciples, likely deep in some philosophical discourse, when an anomaly occurs.
The light.
Yeah, the text describes an auspicious light, a shangguang, surrounding his window. And he just stops talking. He watches it intently. He recognizes immediately that this isn't like a trick of the weather.
He knows what's up.
He tells his students, "This energy is extraordinary. A special person is coming." But instead of staying in the room, flanked by his followers to receive this supernatural guest, he just leaves.
He walks right out.
He walks out of the study and hikes alone up to a high mountain peak.
And his reaction there really reveals his underlying mastery. When confronted with the divine breaking into the mundane world, his instinct is not to hold court.
He doesn't show off.
No, he doesn't use the moment to bolster his authority in front of his disciples. The auspicious light acts as this sudden, sharp reminder of the vastness of the Tao. and it immediately shrinks his role as a master down to its proper, insignificant size.
I love that.
He leaves the echo chamber of his own teachings to seek clarity at a higher altitude.
And the environment gives him the lesson he needs before the guests even arrive. When he reaches the high ridge, he sees an eagle resting alone. He observes the bird, sighs, and quotes an ancient line from the Xi Jing, the classic of poetry.
Beautiful line.
He says, "The yellow bird knows where to rest." And he applies this ancient poetic concept directly to the eagle, and it sparks this massive philosophical realization about the nature of boundaries.
The concept he is unlocking here is ziji, which literally translates to knowing where to stop or knowing where to rest.
Knowing where to stop.
Yes, and this is a cornerstone of classical Chinese philosophy. In the Dafsu, or the Great Learning, knowing where to rest is the prerequisite for achieving a calm mind.
Which leads to everything else.
Exactly, which is the prerequisite for true understanding. The eagle embodies ziji not through aggression, but through spatial awareness.
The text makes a very specific point about how the eagle survives, which I found fascinating. It states that because the eagle stands independently on this towering peak, it is safe from hunters.
It's out of reach.
Right. It mentions people with bows, arrows, and clever nets, pointing out that these hunters can only look up and sigh in frustration. The eagle doesn't survive because it has, I don't know, thicker feathers to deflect arrows or sharper talons to fight
Well,
them.
it doesn't fight at all.
It survives simply because it knows how to elevate itself out of their reach, and then, crucially, it stops moving.
The mechanics of the hunter's tools are the key to the metaphor here. Think about it. A bow requires a target within range.
Right.
A net requires a creature that is actively moving through a specific corridor, usually driven by fear or the search for food.
You have to fly into the net.
Exactly. By finding the highest point and simply resting, the eagle neutralizes the technology of the hunters. It renders the weapons completely obsolete. Z is the profound realization that action and acquisition are not always the answer.
Sometimes doing nothing is the best defense.
True safety and mastery often lie in recognizing the boundary where further movement becomes a liability.
So the eagle just opts out of the game, refuses to enter the arena where the hunters have the advantage. And when you look at human behavior through this lens, the contrast is staggering. If we think about the modern nets we face, they aren't literal traps made of rope. They are cognitive and societal traps. They are the infinite scroll architectures designed to capture our attention.
Social media?
They are the corporate paradigms that equate our self-worth with perpetual productivity.
And those societal architectures we navigate are entirely predicated on perpetual motion. We're constantly incentivized to upgrade our status, our wealth, our influence.
Never stop grinding.
Right. The nets are designed to catch us while we are in a state of grasping for more. We exhaust ourselves flying lower and faster, thinking that speed and agility will save us from the hunters.
When all we had to do was fly up.
Exactly. We completely ignore the fact that simply flying upward and stopping would secure our freedom instantly.
It's so true.
Right.
We see a net labeled answering emails at midnight to seem dedicated, and we fly straight into it.
We do, every time.
We see a net labeled comparing our material success to our peers, and we tangle ourselves in it willingly. We just lack the spatial awareness of the eagle. We don't have a mechanism for saying, the altitude I have reached is sufficient, I am stopping here.
And that lack of a stopping mechanism is precisely what Mr. Li targets next. Standing on that ridge, comparing the eagle's perfect stillness to the absolute chaos of human society, he delivers a brutal diagnosis of human ambition.
He really goes in on us.
He observes that humans are constantly rushing, anxious, and driven by forces they don't even understand.
And he pinpoints exactly what we are rushing toward with two of the most devastatingly brilliant metaphors I've ever heard in classical literature. He says people exhaust their entire lives fighting for the empty fame of a snail's horn and the tiny profit of a fly's head.
Those phrases are just incredible. To fully grasp the impact of the snail's horn metaphor, Wojiao, we have to look at its origin in the Zhuangzi, which is one of the foundational texts of Taoism.
Okay, lay it on me.
So, Zhuangzi tells a story to a king who is obsessed with geopolitical conquest. He describes two kingdoms, the kingdom of Chu and the kingdom of Man. These kingdoms are locked in this horrific, endless war.
Sounds intense.
They slaughter each other by the tens of thousands, fighting over territory, leaving bodies strewn across the battlefield.
It sounds like an epic world-ending conflict.
It is, to the participants. But Zhuangzi then reveals the setting of this war. The kingdom of Chu is located entirely on the left horn of a snail.
Wait, what?
Yep. And the kingdom of man is located on the right horn.
Oh my God. That is amazing.
When the king hears this, he realizes the sheer absurdity of his own territorial wars. From the perspective of the cosmos, the entirety of human geopolitical struggle, the fame of conquering nations, the pride of a larger empire.
It's all happening on the antenna of a mollusk. That completely shatters the scale of human self-importance. Like, when Lee looks down from the mountain, he isn't just criticizing greedy merchants. He is looking at kings, scholars, generals, and realizing that everything they dedicate their lives to is infinitesimally small.
It's all relative.
It is empty fame because the territory they're conquering doesn't actually exist in any meaningful cosmic sense.
And then he pairs that with the fly's head prophet, Ying Tu. The poet Sushi later popularized this exact phrasing to describe the relentless pursuit of micro-margins in business and status.
A fly's head.
Think about it. A fly is already an insignificant, annoying creature. To focus on the head of a fly is to obsess over a fraction of something that is already worthless.
Wow. That's bleak, but accurate.
It perfectly represents the micro-ambitions that consume our daily lives. You know, the promotion that comes with a title change but no real power.
Right.
The digital metrics of social approval. The slight edge in a negotiation that ruins a real relationship.
And Lai states that by chasing these microscopic illusions, humans self-drive into traps. And I really want to linger on that phrase for a second.
It's a key phrase.
We aren't being hunted by some malicious deity. We aren't victims of circumstance. We literally bait our own traps with the promise of a fly's head, and then we step right into them.
Willingly.
The text points out the tragic irony. Like, humans supposedly possess high intelligence, yet we spend our lives tangling ourselves in nets, and we only realize the futility of it at the moment of death. We spend the entire game hoarding snail horns, and only when the clock runs out do we realize they have zero value.
The neurobiology of this behavior actually aligns perfectly with Lai's observation. Our dopamine systems evolved to reward the pursuit of resources.
Because we needed them to survive.
Right. In an ancient environment, securing a small profit, like a handful of berries or a slightly better tool, meant survival. But in a complex, abstract society, that dopamine system gets hijacked.
We get the same hit from a notification.
Exactly. We get the same neurochemical reward for securing a fly's head of social status or wealth. The brain cannot distinguish between a survival-critical resource and an empty metric, so it just drives us relentlessly toward the trap.
Well, wait, I have to challenge Lee's position here for a minute. The text explicitly says that Lee uses this brutal observation about human nature to warn himself.
Yes.
He composes a poem on the spot about knowing when to stop, demanding that he must not seek even an inch more, and pledging not to imitate those who long for the dust of the world. But why does a man who can literally separate his spirit from his body need to warn himself about the dangers of a fly's head?
That's a great question.
It suggests that spiritual mastery does not grant immunity from human psychology. Like, the pull is still there.
That is probably the most radical admission in the entire passage. It dismantles the myth of the infallible guru.
He's still human.
He is. Lead recognizes that the ego is a hydra. You cut off the desire for material wealth, and it regrows as the desire for spiritual prestige.
Oh, wow.
Remember that cave full of disciples we talked about earlier? The reverence of those followers is a new, highly sophisticated trap.
It's a spiritual snail's horn.
Exactly. Being the greatest master in the forest is just as empty as being the wealthiest merchant in the city. But it is far more seductive because it disguises itself as holiness.
So he is standing on the ridge, literally and metaphorically shaking the dust off his clothes, reminding himself that he is just a biological creature susceptible to the exact same dopamine loops as the kings fighting on the snail's horn.
He has to stay vigilant.
He has to consciously activate ZZ. He has to force himself to stop.
And it is only when he achieves that total internal realignment, when he actively rejects the spiritual ego and embraces his own insignificance, that the cosmic guests finally arrive.
The payoff.
The auspicious light solidifies, and the sky just fills with ethereal clouds.
The arrival is spectacular. Laozi, the legendary author of the Tao Te Ching, and Huaqi, an ancient immortal, they descend from the sky riding on cranes.
The cranes are very significant.
I was going to ask about that. In Taoist iconography, cranes are the vehicles of the immortals, right?
Yes, they navigate the heavens completely detached from the earth. They are basically the ultimate manifestation of the eagle's wisdom.
Oh, I see the connection.
They are creatures of the sky, entirely untouched by the nets below.
And their arrival confirms that Lee's internal realization on the mountain was the correct key to the lock. Laozi looks at him and explicitly validates his process. He says, observing your journey today, it is truly enough to manifest the principles I taught you in the past.
Notice what he isn't praising.
Right. Laozi isn't praising Li for gathering a large following of disciples in the cave. He is praising Li for recognizing the trap of the snail's horn and having the discipline to shake off the dust.
So they return to Li's humble thatched study, and Li, who is ever the student, bows and asks for the next level of instruction.
Give me the secret.
And Laozi then delivers a philosophical directive that completely upends standard human logic. It is the absolute core teaching of the Taoist tradition.
What does he say?
Laozi says, in pursuing the Dao, one decreases daily, decrease and decrease again until one reaches non-action. He instructs Lin to let his mind wander lightly, nourish his vast spirit, and be naturally selfless.
Okay, let's unpack that because it's huge.
It is a direct invocation of Chapter 48 of the Tao Te Ching, and it requires a complete paradigm shift to really understand. The famous line is, in the pursuit of learning, one knows more every day. In the pursuit of the way, one does less every day.
Which is so alien to us.
Because human societal structures are built entirely on the principle of addition. We equate progress with accumulation.
Always adding.
You add credentials to your name, you add complexity to your business, you add defensive layers to your personality.
Yeah, the entire architecture of modern capitalism and education is predicated on compound interest, right? Like the relentless exponential addition of value or knowledge or influence.
Exactly.
To tell someone in our society to decrease daily sounds like professional and social suicide. Like you'd be left behind immediately.
It sounds like suicide because we equate our identity with the sum of our accumulations. But Laozi is arguing that those accumulations are exactly what make us heavy, anxious, and vulnerable to the nets.
The more you have, the more you have to protect.
Right. Decreasing daily is the systematic dismantling of the artificial self. It means shedding preconceived notions, discarding the desperate need to control outcomes, and just dismantling the ego that constantly demands validation.
You aren't losing your core self then.
No, you are not losing your capability. You are simply removing the friction that hinders it.
It's like cognitive decluttering on a survival level. But when he says decrease and decrease again until one reaches non-action, that non-action is wu-wei, correct?
Yes, wu-wei.
And we have to be very precise about what wu-wei actually means here, because it is so often horribly misinterpreted as just, sitting on the couch and letting life happen to you, like total passivity.
That mistranslation of wu-wei as laziness or apathy is one of the great tragedies in cross-cultural philosophy, honestly.
It completely misses the point.
It does. Wu-wei actually means effortless action or non-coercive action. It is action that is perfectly aligned with the natural flow of reality, requiring no forced, ego-driven exertion.
Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Sure, think of the thermodynamics of a river cutting through a canyon.
Okay.
The water isn't trying to cut the rock. It isn't anxious about its progress. It simply acts according to its nature, finding the path of least resistance, and in doing so, it reshapes the earth.
It's the ultimate state of flow.
Exactly.
Like when a master craftsman is working or a brilliant musician is improvising, they aren't consciously thinking about the mechanics of their fingers. The ego is entirely absent. The action just happens through them, naturally and selflessly.
That is wu-wei.
But Laozi takes this from a concept of artistic flow and applies it to the entirety of human existence. He tells Li to let the mind wander lightly. And you cannot wander lightly if you are carrying the heavy burdens of ambition, resentment, or the fear of losing your tiny fly's head profit.
To achieve that lightness, you must return to the state of the uncarved block, or pu.
The uncarved block. I love that image.
A carved block is useful for one specific thing. It has been shaped by society, given a title, given a function, but in being carved, it has lost its infinite potential.
It's locked in.
Right. By decreasing daily, Li is uncarving himself. He is removing the identity of the master in the cave, removing the identity of the man who projects his yin-shen until nothing is left but the raw, unconditioned spirit.
But intellectual understanding is completely different from experiential reality. I mean, Li understands the theory of decreasing. He just wrote a poem about it.
Talking the talk.
Right. Laozi, however, is not going to just hand him the diploma and fly away. He institutes a practical exam to test if Li can truly execute this philosophy.
Yeah.
And this is where the text pivots from a serene philosophical dialogue into a literal high-stakes thriller.
Laozi races the stakes from the conceptual to the existential. He invites Li to travel with him to the western regions. But the conditions of the invitation are extreme.
Extreme is an understatement. Laozi tells Li that he and Wan Qi are leaving immediately. "You have exactly 10 days, Laozi says. "In 10 days your spirit must rush to my side. Do not fail this agreement."
No pressure.
And then they simply vanish into the sky. Li is left with a ticking clock. The text says light and shadow pass easily, meaning the 10 days just evaporate quickly.
Time flies.
And on the final day, Li summons his most trusted disciple, Yangzi, and gives him a set of instructions that represent the ultimate test of both men.
These instructions require a really deep understanding of the bipartite soul in Chinese metaphysics. We discussed the yin shen earlier, but here the text gets very specific about the division of the self.
What's the division?
Li states he's going to send his shen, which is his ethereal wandering spirit, to meet Laozi, but he is leaving his po, his physical, corporeal soul, behind.
Okay, so the po is the anchor. It is the yin aspect of the soul that governs the physiological functions of the body.
Yeah.
Like it's intimately tied to the earth and the flesh.
Yes.
While the shen is yang, celestial, and can travel.
Exactly. The shen can wander the cosmos, but it requires the po and the physical body to remain intact as a home base.
Like a tether.
Right. If the physical body is destroyed, or if the po dissipates due to biological death, the tether is severed. The shen becomes a wandering ghost, entirely unmoored from the physical realm.
That sounds dangerous.
By voluntarily separating the two, Li is putting himself into a state of suspended animation that borders on actual death.
And he places the responsibility for maintaining that tether entirely in the hands of his disciple.
Yeah.
Li tells Yangzi, "If my wandering soul does not return in exactly 7 days, you are permitted to transform or destroy my physical body."
Just unbelievable.
Meaning you can burn it, bury it, it's over.
But Leek emphasizes, if it's less than 7 days, you must guard this body perfectly. Do not let it be ruined. He then sits down, and his spirit simply vacates the premises, leaving Yangzi staring at a lifeless shell.
The psychology of this moment is staggering. You have to look at this from both sides. For Li, this is the final, ultimate manifestation of decreasing daily.
Because he's giving up the ultimate thing, right? What is the final thing a human being clings to? Biological survival. The instinct to protect the physical form is the root of all other anxieties.
Survival instinct.
By leaving his body behind and trusting it to another human being, Li is demonstrating absolute wu-wei. He has relinquished all control over his own survival. He is perfectly detached from the outcome.
It is a terrifying lack of ego. If Yangzi fails, Li dies. For Li to calmly sit down and exit his body, he has to genuinely accept the possibility of his own destruction.
If he had any hesitation, it wouldn't work.
If he was anxious about the body, his shen would never be able to make the journey to Mount Hua.
Yeah.
The tether of fear would just snap him right back into his flesh.
But the burden placed on Yangzi is arguably even more intense. Li could have hidden his body. He could have sealed himself in the deepest cavern, rolled a boulder over the entrance, and ensured no animal or human could interfere.
He had options.
The choice to leave the body explicitly in the care of a disciple is deliberate. It is a crisis of succession.
It forces Yangzi to undergo his own trial. And why 7 days? The number 7 is deeply embedded in Chinese cosmology, right?
Yes, very much so.
Like the cycles of life and death. In Buddhist and Taoist syncretism, the soul is believed to undergo transitions in 7-day increments, culminating in the 49 days of the Bardo state. So 7 days is a cosmological boundary.
It's the critical window.
But for Yangzi, it is an agonizingly long time to sit in a dark cave with a corpse, watching the shadows move, fighting off scavengers, and basically battling his own mind.
Li is testing whether Yangzi has absorbed the teachings. Can Yangzi exhibit the same ZZ, knowing how to hold his ground and not be moved by panic?
Can he stand still like the eagle?
Exactly. Can Yangzi resist the nets of fear and impatience? True spiritual transmission isn't just handing over a book of spells. It is proving that the disciple's internal architecture can actually withstand the crushing weight of reality.
When you synthesize this entire narrative, the trajectory is just breathtaking. We started with a man fleeing the grandeur of Mount Hua for the isolation of a cave, only to realize that isolation is just another stage for the ego.
He had to climb higher, learning from the eagle that survival isn't about fighting the hunters or reinforcing your armor.
It's about altitude.
It is about recognizing the altitude where the hunter's nets cannot reach. It is the profound wisdom of knowing when to stop.
And we confronted the brutal reality of human nature along the way. Our absurd neurochemical addiction to the empty fame of a snail's horn and the microscopic profit of a fly's head.
A reality we all face.
We saw that even a master must constantly shake the dust of these micro-ambitions from his clothes.
Then we unpacked Laozi's radical countermeasure, The philosophy of decreasing daily, stripping away the accumulated heavy armor of identity and ambition until we can act with effortless alignment to the Tao.
And it all culminates in the silent cave, with a spirit flying toward the mountains and a vulnerable, fleshy anchor left in the hands of a flawed, terrified disciple. It is the ultimate exercise in relinquishing control.
The text forces you to consider the fragility of the vessels we entrust our lives to. Lai has achieved the ultimate detachment, but his physical reality is still fundamentally tethered to the mundane world.
Which leaves us with a critical, lingering reality to consider. And I want you, the listener, to mull over this. The text ends on this massive cliffhanger with the clock ticking down on those 7 days. Just spent the entire middle section of this story diagnosing the inescapable, flawed nature of humanity.
He laid it all out.
He observed how easily we are distracted, how quickly we panic, and how we willingly drive ourselves into traps for the tiniest of profits. He even acknowledged that he, a master, was vulnerable to those forces. So what happens when you place the most important physical object in the world into the hands of someone who is undeniably, profoundly human?
It's the ultimate gamble.
If the master had to warn himself against the pull of the mundane, how vulnerable is Yangtze to the whispers of doubt, the panic of isolation, or the sudden mundane demands of the outside world?